When David suggested a vacation, I thought it was his way of trying to fix us. Things hadn't been the same lately. His late nights at work, the constant glow of his phone screen, and the way he seemed to withdraw from me piece by piece had built a quiet wall between us. But when he mentioned the trip, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to tear that wall down. I packed with excitement, telling myself this would be the reset button we desperately needed. The resort was beautiful. Sunlight glittered across the water, and the salty air carried a promise of freedom. As we walked along the sandy path to our room, I noticed David seemed restless. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out instantly, fingers flying across the screen. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend I didn't notice the way he tilted the screen away from me. Maybe it was just work. Maybe it was nothing. That's what I kept telling myself. Dinner that first night felt strange. He laughed at something on his phone more than he laughed at me. I caught him staring into the distance, like his mind was already somewhere else. I asked about his day, about the projects he was working on, and he nodded absently, giving me fragments of his attention. My heart ached, but I kept smiling. If this trip was going to save us, I had to keep trying. The next morning, as I waited in the lobby for David, I saw her. Clara. She was tall, striking, and carried herself with a confidence that immediately made me feel small. I didn't know her then, not yet. She smiled politely at me as she walked past, and I thought nothing of it, until David appeared behind me with her by his side. "Emily, this is Clara," he said far too casually, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "She's a colleague. Can you believe she's staying at the same resort? Total coincidence." I forced a smile and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, almost triumphant. My stomach twisted. What were the odds? Out of all the places in the world, she just happened to be here. From that moment, Clara seemed to appear everywhere. At breakfast, she strolled by our table, and David insisted she join us. On the beach, she laid her towel far too close, laughing a little too hard at David's jokes. At first, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid, maybe I was reading too much into harmless friendliness. But then I noticed the little things. The way her hand brushed against his arm, how their eyes lingered on each other longer than necessary. The inside jokes I wasn't a part of. It felt like watching a movie where I wasn't the leading lady anymore. I had become the background character, sitting quietly while the real story unfolded between them. I smiled through clenched teeth, my chest tightening each time Clara leaned closer to him. I told myself not to make a scene, not to ruin the vacation. If David said she was just a colleague, then I should believe him, right? But belief doesn't stop the ache of being invisible. It doesn't stop the sting of humiliation when your husband shares a joke with another woman and looks at her the way he used to look at you. That evening, as we sat by the fire pit, Clara told stories about late nights at the office, projects they had worked on together, and moments I had never heard about. She knew details about David's life that I didn't. I felt a chill run through me despite the warmth of the flames. David laughed easily, throwing in details of his own, and I sat there, nodding, sipping my drink, trying not to let the tears reach my eyes. Later in the room, I lay awake while David showered. My mind replayed every glance, every laugh, every touch. I remembered the way his hand rested on the small of her back as they walked up the steps earlier. So casual, so familiar. My throat burned as I stared at the ceiling. Was I really imagining it? Was this all in my head? When David crawled into bed, he turned away from me without a word. His breathing soon evened out, while mine stayed shallow and uneven. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own doubts. I wanted to shake him, to scream, to demand answers, but instead I lay still, because some part of me already knew. In the morning, Clara joined us again, this time uninvited. David didn't even seem surprised to see her. She slipped into the chair beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. I smiled because what else could I do? If I broke, if I cried, if I accused, then I would look like the crazy one. So I decided not to confront, not yet. Instead, I would watch. I would collect every glance, every whisper, every secret smile. Because while David thought he was being clever, and Clara thought she was winning, I was quietly piecing together the truth. And once I had enough, I would know exactly what to do. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of forced smiles and silent observations. I had promised myself that I would watch, that I would gather every shred of proof I needed before deciding what to do, and so I played along. I let David believe I was blind, and I let Clara believe I was powerless. Inside, though, I was unraveling. At breakfast, Clara was always there before I even sat down, her laugh ringing out across the dining room like she owned the place. She ordered what David liked without even asking him, as if she knew his preferences better than I did. And maybe, in some ways, she did now. I sat across from them, stirring my coffee long after it had gone cold, pretending to listen while my heart clenched tighter with every casual touch between them. One afternoon we went on a snorkeling excursion. Clara just happened to book the same trip. The boat ride over was a nightmare. David sat beside her, shoulders brushing, their heads tilted together as they shared some secret conversation I couldn't hear over the waves. I sat alone, gripping the side of the boat, staring out at the endless water, fighting the sting in my eyes. When we slipped into the sea, Clara clung to David, pretending to be nervous, letting him guide her through the water while I floated nearby, invisible. That night, after we returned to the resort, I excused myself early, claiming a headache. David didn't protest. I lay in the dark, waiting, listening to the minutes stretch into hours. Just when I thought I might have been wrong, that he had truly gone to bed after a drink with Clara, I heard it. Low voices outside on the balcony. I crept closer and peeked through the curtains. There they were, sitting far too close, Clara's hand resting on his arm. The way they leaned into each other told me everything words never could. She laughed softly, and his smile in that moment wasn't the polite smile he gave me anymore. It was real, alive, the way he used to look at me years ago. My stomach turned to stone. I wanted to burst through the glass door, to scream and demand answers, but instead I froze. Watching them from behind that curtain, I felt both powerless and strangely powerful. They didn't know I was there, and that gave me time. Time to think. Time to decide how this story would end. The next morning, I noticed the evidence I had been waiting for. David's shirt, lying crumpled in the corner, carried a faint smear of lipstick at the collar. Not my shade. Clara's. I held it in my hands, my chest tightening, and for a brief moment I wanted to crumble. But instead, I folded it neatly and placed it back where I found it. Proof, I thought. Quiet, undeniable proof. The following day we planned a hike up to a lookout point. Clara insisted on joining us again. I watched as David carried her water bottle in addition to his own, something he hadn't done for me in years. When the path grew steep, she slipped her hand into his for balance, and he didn't let go. I trailed behind, my eyes burning but my steps steady. Every laugh they shared, every glance, every stolen moment only fueled the fire inside me. That evening, I finally saw what I had been dreading and expecting. I had stepped out for some air, walking quietly toward the beach, when I spotted them just ahead. Clara leaned against him, her hand brushing along his chest as she whispered something that made him smile. The intimacy between them was undeniable, the kind that no excuse could cover anymore. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the waves crashing softly behind me. Then, slowly, something inside me shifted. The heartbreak didn't disappear, but it hardened into resolve. I realized that confronting them now, in the heat of anger, would give them too much power. Clara would gloat, David would deny, and I would walk away feeling small. Well, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I decided to let them think they were winning. To let them dig the hole deeper with every careless touch and whispered laugh. And when the time was right, I would walk away. Not broken, not begging, but stronger than they ever expected me to be. That night, as I lay in bed beside David, I stared at the ceiling again. My heart was heavy, but my mind was clear. He shifted in his sleep, turning toward me, but even in his unconscious state, his arm reached across the empty space between us and landed in the wrong place. On the mattress, never on me. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I whispered to myself, "You don't know what's coming." Because deep down, I knew the end of this story wouldn't be mine to suffer. It would be theirs. The morning sun spilled across the room, painting golden streaks across the floor, and I knew it was time. I had watched enough, collected enough, endured enough. David stirred beside me, groggy and unaware of the storm gathering just beyond his reach. Clara would be expecting him, no doubt. They thought they were playing me, but I had made my decision. I wouldn't confront, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg. I would let them have exactly what they wanted. Over breakfast, I smiled more than usual, so much so that David seemed confused. Clara was already at the table, sitting a little too close to him, her arm brushing his with feigned innocence. I looked at them both, their charade so poorly hidden, and I almost laughed. When Clara tried to include me in conversation, I leaned back, my voice steady and calm. "You two look so happy together," I said softly. Their eyes widened, David choking slightly on his coffee. Clara, bold as ever, tilted her head with a smirk. We just work well as a team." He nodded. "Then you should enjoy this vacation together." The silence that followed was heavy. David stared at me, searching my face for anger, for tears, for some sign of collapse. But all he found was peace. Clara, mistaking my calm for surrender, smiled smugly. She thought she had won. That was fine by me. Back in the room, I packed slowly, methodically folding each piece of clothing as though I had all the time in the world. David walked in, his voice uneasy. "Emily, what are you doing?" I didn't look at him as I zipped my bag. "I'm giving you what you want. You brought her here, David. You wanted me to see. So now you can have her. Both of you can enjoy the vacation. I'm leaving." His face drained of color. "Wait, it's not like that. Don't insult me," I cut him off, my voice sharp but calm. "I've watched you. I've seen the way you look at her, the way you let her touch you, the late nights, the lipstick on your shirt. Don't you dare stand here and tell me I imagined it." He stammered, searching for words, but none came. Clara lingered in the doorway, a flicker of uncertainty on her face now. She hadn't expected me to be so composed. I lifted my bag onto my shoulder, walked past them both, and left a note on the nightstand. "Enjoy your vacation. It's all yours now." By the time the plane lifted into the air, carrying me away from them, I felt lighter than I had in years. I stared out the window as the resort disappeared beneath the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled for myself. Back at home, the silence of the empty house was almost soothing. No buzzing phone, no nervous glances, no lies. Just peace. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the quiet, letting the weight of it all finally slide off my shoulders. The messages from David began that evening. Long, frantic paragraphs about misunderstandings, about how he never meant for it to happen, about how Clara didn't mean anything. Each word reeked of desperation. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because he didn't deserve them. Weeks passed. From mutual friends, I learned that Clara hadn't lasted long. Once the thrill of sneaking around was gone, the cracks began to show. David, stripped of his safety net, tried to hold on to her, but she slipped away. The fantasy they had built together crumbled the moment reality set in. And then he was left with nothing. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. Slowly at first. New routines, new confidence, rediscovering the parts of myself I had buried under years of sacrifice. I began to laugh again, real laughter, not the forced kind I had clung to at that resort. I reconnected with friends, started picking up hobbies I had abandoned, and for the first time in a long time I felt alive. David tried to see me, begged for another chance, but I never let him through the door. He had made his choice and I had made mine. I had given him the freedom he thought he wanted, and in return I reclaimed my own. Sometimes at night I would think back to that vacation, the golden sunsets, the quiet ocean, and the moment I decided to stop waiting for someone to save our marriage. It was strange, really. The very trip that was supposed to fix us ended up being the trip that freed me. I no longer saw myself as the woman who was betrayed. I saw myself as the woman who walked away with her dignity intact, the woman who refused to break, the woman who let them think they won only to discover that I was the one who came out stronger. Betrayal hurts, but it also teaches. And what I learned was simple. I was worth more than secrets, more than lies, more than a man who couldn't choose me fully. So when I think back now, I don't see Clara's smug smile or David's guilty eyes. I see myself, standing tall with my suitcase in hand, walking out the door without looking back. And that, I realized, was the most powerful ending I could ever give to our story.